All right, folks, back here at TDWI in Orlando. I'm with my good buddy Sean Knapp from Ascend. You might remember him from San Diego. They have super agents and all kinds of the whole agent architecture now. And so we want to get into the weeds and understand what is an AI agent? What should you be able to expect it to do? How is it designed? How is it orchestrated? All that kind of fun stuff. So let's start off with a definition of an AI agent from your perspective and how you design one.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, first and foremost, AI agents aren't the boogeyman. They're not coming for our jobs.
Right,
They're not magic.
right.
In fact, I think they're increasingly predictable. I don't want to call them deterministic, but increasingly predictable
Interesting.
entities. They do what seems like really magical things, but as we go deeper, they're predictable and they're understandable and they're explainable. And I think that's because, well, agents are powered by LLMs. They generally mix just a handful of things. They have their own instructions and guidance,
Mm-hmm.
sort of the first pillar. Second is we feed a ton of context into them.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the art meets science is what context
Right,
we feed into them and when, what
right,
guidance we give them.
right.
And happy to unpack on that a little bit more. Um, the third thing is we give them the ability to take action. Oftentimes nowadays that's via MCP
I was going to say
servers, right?
MVP.
Yep.
Yep.
So they can go send a Slack message or send you an email or run a query on a database. The fourth thing, which that's I think less common, but is really important, is they're able to take action. Or sorry, have customized triggers.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're used to the trigger for an agent being I send you a message
Mm-hmm.
and chat, and
Mm-hmm.
that's the trigger for an agent. But an agent can be triggered by all sorts of things. It could be triggered by a system event, like
Mm-hmm.
this
Sure.
server went down or this data pipeline failed.
Right.
And those four combined in a continuous loop are really what constitutes an agent, generally with a goal being defined
Mm-hmm.
in those instructions. And then the context continuously being supplemented in that loop by feedback mechanisms.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what really, I think, what makes an agent and fundamentally different than an LLM invocation that's doing a single shot trying to achieve some magical outcome all at once. As an
Mm-hmm.
agent kind of runs through this cycle, getting more context, taking actions, and getting feedback from those actions, and continues to iterate as it pursues that goal.
Right. And when you say single shot, you're talking about hitting the LM, coming back one time with a bunch of stuff
Yeah,
and expecting to get that all correct on the first try. And you're saying don't do it that way.
I think it's really hard. And the what I've generally found is I think we're still like an order or two magnitude away from like sophistication of LLMs to be able to do these like perfect single shot, especially without like really strong prompting and example
Mm-hmm.
on how to achieve outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
Where I think we're seeing what's just like wildly more exciting performance and behavior are these agents that can iterate
Mm-hmm.
and go through cycles. And the way that you'd have described it to some folks here, which has been sort of a fun analogy, is look, like we're used to using ChatGPT in the consumer side or saying like, hey, I want to go write an email or an article or something, and you can have agents generate text. But I would contend is why agents are even better at programmatic things than generating of text is there's no feedback mechanism. There's no linter in the same way. There's no compilation
Mm-hmm.
when I'm writing an article
Mm-hmm.
to tell me like this definitively works in a binary outcome.
Interesting.
Whereas agents do great in writing code, building data pipelines in our world because they write code and then does that code compile
Right.
or not? And then they try and run it and can the warehouse run the code appropriately? And they get all of this feedback mechanism that you don't get if it's hey, write an email and tell
From
me
the
if it's good.
testing, basically. So from the
Exactly.
process, they write the code, then they test the code. If it works, they say, yes, I worked, and now I can go on to the next thing. But if it doesn't, oh, nope, it didn't work. Let's do it again.
Exactly. And that's what makes, I think, agents so exciting, especially in engineering realms, is that ability to not have them be perfect at the exact right point in time when you just give it a single prompt.
Hmm.
But what we watch a lot of users in our product do, and the behavior that's so cool and exciting is you let the agent loose, and it's not going to get the exact right query or the exact right design done the first time, but you let it go and let it just keep iterating and
Hmm.
eventually it converges on the right answer. And we've seen it, do things where it finds breaks in code that our humans didn't even notice or
Right.
detect.
Right.
And so I think that's the really cool part that we're finding with the agents is they can do these really powerful things if we don't panic when we see them take the wrong first step because they're able to self-correct and keep going.
Interesting. That's interesting. So, and you talk about groups of agents converging on ideas. So, I mean, you can have this declarative environment where you're saying, look, I want this pipeline up 99.9% of the time. And you allow these agents to monitor all that. So they're doing observability, then they're doing remediation if something happens.
Yep.
And what your point is, it is basically saying that, look, give it the objective and then give it some time to get there. Don't panic if it screws it up the first time, just know that it's going to try. Now, at a certain point, obviously, you have to say, all right, you're not getting it right. I have to fix something.
Yep.
But what you're saying is just give it a little time with the right objective and it'll get there.
Yeah, it'll converge and not 100% of the time, right? Just like how if you give your intern
Right.
some task or a junior developer, they're not always going to get it right. But I
Hmm.
think we're at the point now where the LLMs are getting advanced enough. And similarly, platforms like ours and many others out there are getting really good at injecting the right context into that stream for the agent, where it's getting that feedback loop, it's getting the learnings in really powerful ways where it is able to really converge
Right.
on the right outcome.
Well, here's my big question is how do you determine the optimal amount and exact type of context to provide? And then how do you do that? I mean, you
Hmm.
started off as a sort of declarative pipeline company.
Hmm.
So you had this vision in mind of being able to dynamically connect source and target basically and to get the data where it needs to be.
Hmm.
So it makes sense that you have a play in the AI space.
Hmm.
But it's like what I've learned is that not enough context and too much context are equally bad
Yeah.
with these things, just like with people. If you give some person a whole like manual to follow and like put them out there on day one, they're gonna have a hard freaking time doing it,
Yeah.
right? But if you give it just enough and know the key bits, so how do you do that, and how do you actually deliver the data to the agent at the right time?
Hmm. Well, so we've taken an architectural approach that we really, really have found tremendous success with.
Hmm.
And we touched on a little bit last time you and I talked, but we didn't go, very in depth on it, which is, what we've seen a lot of people do is go through this sort of Goldilocks evolution of first I have my super agent and I'm going
Hmm.
to give it all the rules to all the things. And it's like, imagine a new person joins your team and you're like, here's the entire employee handbook and
Yeah,
the
right.
entire developer handbook. Read all of it, memorize all of it, and then do your job perfectly
Right.
from day one.
Right.
Nobody can actually do that. It's too many rules. And oftentimes, when you put into a real world context,
Right.
too many of the rules can be confusing and in conflict
Yeah,
with each
sure.
other.
Sure.
And so, if you flood your context with too many directions and directives, it gets way too confusing for agents. So then we see people move, and we even tried this actually for a while too, which was the micro agent model,
Hmm.
where you have a delegating agent and many
Hmm.
agents that are good at small individual
Hmm.
tasks.
Right.
We found that still limiting because the ability to hand off between those agents
Hmm.
was somewhat limiting, and the delegating agent didn't always get the right call. I think
Interesting.
LLMs have actually gotten better and faster, where I think that architecture can still work pretty nicely,
Mm-hmm.
but there's a bunch of challenges around how much context do you share between them and so on.
Hmm.
The approach we've seen that works really, really nicely is it's very reminiscent of the Matrix in many ways, where Neo's they plug him in and he's like downloads kung fu and how to fly a helicopter.
Right.
It's very similar to that, where we actually do a rule fetching model where the rules give you skills
Hmm.
essentially, where they teach you how to do certain things that are specific to the conversation.
Hmm.
And this is one of the ways that in Ascend, we've been able to train our agents to be really good at a wide swath of capabilities,
Hmm.
is by having a bunch of industry specific and domain specific rules that get dynamically loaded based on context.
Hmm.
And so that, the surrounding context injects these into the context window. So it's what kind of files are you working
I
on?
see.
What's, did the user say certain things in their prompt that should be injected? And then we still tell them, the agent itself, here's the entire suite of rules that are available to you.
Hmm.
And not just our rules, but user provided rules as well.
Interesting.
And so even if we don't dynamically detect the right thing to inject from a software perspective, the
Hmm.
agent can still say, you know what, I actually do want that rule over here, and it will fetch it and use that rule to adapt its behaviors.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty interesting stuff too. I mean, and then in terms of monitoring, do the agents just write a log file every time they do something, which you can then go read? Is that kind of how that works?
Yeah, so we keep full history of the agent operations and
Hmm.
expose that inside the product as well.
Hmm.
One of the really fun things to do is oftentimes when you find, hey, this agent didn't do the exact thing that I wanted, or I'm curious why it did that, is to actually fork that whole message thread and to have a conversation with the agent, even if it was triggered asynchronously.
No
And
kidding.
so like these are the really cool things that you can do where because eventually when you're invoking an agent, it's a combination of the system prompt and the context window.
Right.
Uh, how cool is it that you can then say, oh, you know what? Like, hey, Otto, our agent, why did you do that? And you could ask it 10 times over and you may get, marginally different answers. But if you're
Hmm.
feeding the same context window that it took all these other operations on, but with a new prompt at the tail end of that, you can even have your agent self-reflect and tell you why they had certain behaviors and even recommended changes to the prompt and the rules that you're providing to further adapt the behavior.
This is interesting. So when, let's say an agent gets something correct and really starts doing it well, does it then persist? Is there a way for it to persist that as a rule now going forward that it then accesses? And are there
Really,
are there sort of multi-layered rules? Like there are X number of like hard and fast rules, and then if that doesn't work, you go to the next layer. If that doesn't work, kind of
mhm.
thing. Is that kind of how it works?
We haven't added that in yet. It's similar to this. We've thought about these in a few different ways.
Hmm.
You can actually have the agents write rules for
Hmm.
themselves based on their learnings, which is a
Hmm.
super cool pattern. And we do have them reflect on it, even when we're developing internally. Oftentimes, we might ask the agent through the interface how it would suggest changes to the rules we provide as well.
Wow.
Um, the other thing that I think it becomes really interesting is being able to score your previous conversations. And we've seen this in I believe ChatGPT does this too,
I
but
see.
essentially doing RAG and recall off of previous threads
Mm,
based on new ones.
interesting.
I think the in a developer space, I think makes a ton of sense. You'd want tighter grain
Sure.
controls over it, like on your agents that are running in production,
Right.
to make sure that you don't get sort of, problematic behavior,
Right.
but you could still do some really cool stuff like that in production as well.
Well, if you think about coding, I mean, the number of permutations of code functions you can delineate is much smaller than the English language.
Right.
Like when you talk in language, so it's a simpler problem to solve. And I think that's one reason why these technologies work well in that space, in that code development space, right?
Yep.
Because first of all, there has to be a right answer. Because
Yeah.
if it doesn't work, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Right. And now it can work efficiently or inefficiently, but at least it works. And so that's a line of demarcation.
Yeah.
Whereas with text, open text, it's like, well, I don't know.
Exactly.
Is it the story or is it not the story? It's a narrative, right?
Yep.
I'm going to throw one last question at you. Got about 2.5 minutes left. A guy I know, Lou Simon from Optima, he made this really fascinating observation about AI and the concerns around hallucinations and errors. And he said, look, if someone comes into your office and gives you some perspective on something, you don't expect that they'll be right 100% of the time, but they're bringing their own intelligence.
Yeah.
And this is an intelligence which you can then work with and shape and morph to your needs. That doesn't mean you have to accept everything it says.
Yep.
And so there's a bit of a almost like a categorical mistake people are making as they approach these technologies. And I thought it was a really interesting way to describe that. He's like,
Hmm.
look, it's an intelligence. It's not going to get everything right or
Right.
everything wrong, but it is going to bring up interesting points that you have to keep in mind,
Yeah.
right? And then that's when you leverage it as a manager, as a human being working with the tool, right?
Yep. Exactly. And I think this is the exciting part that as we do work with AI, it's not going to take your jobs.
Right.
It's a really really powerful tool, but it's still highly beneficial for that judgment.
Right.
And one of the things I was telling some folks here earlier that is why I get so excited about using AI is I appreciate that it brings in a lot of the intelligence, but one of the exciting parts is such a leverage function for us is our brains work much faster than our hands can
Hmm.
type. And
Wow.
so when we have all of our jobs are largely oriented around how fast can we type, whether we're building data systems or writing articles,
That's pretty funny.
it's that's the limiting factor of value creation for us.
That's funny.
And so if I can actually interact with an LLM and it can do the typey for me better than I can do it,
Right.
but it's bringing its intelligence and I can still interact with it and steer it in the direction that is aligned with my experience,
How interesting.
it's
That's
a win.
wild. I'll close on one of my frustrations with autocorrect. I've noticed in my laptop here when I'm typing, it's an Apple. I need to turn this off. it'll go, oh, you want to say this and like finish some sentence. I'm like, no, I didn't. Would you stop doing that? Like, just go back. And my friend Sammy Akpay from Inside Software, he's like, that's because you and I type too fast, Eric. You are too good of a typist. That's why you have this problem. I'm like, well, I guess that's true. So it's like you have to manage these environments is the point. The agents, they can go do cool things and they
Yep,
will do things incorrectly. You just have to monitor and manage that and understand it is an intelligence that has value, right?
exactly.
Well, folks, look this gentleman up online, Sean Knapp, Ascend. Knapp is Knapp, Ascend IO. Good stuff. We'll talk to you next time.
All right, thank you.
All right, folks, we'll be right back. You're listening to DM Radio. All right, ladies and gentlemen, here we are broadcasting from TDWI, the Transform event in Orlando, Florida. It was fun. I got my badge today. It said staff, just like the old days. 20 years ago, I used to work here.
Yeah,
I was the web evangelist, brought them into the world of doing webinars,
that's right.
using the web for education. It was a crazy thing 20 years ago. Now it's like everybody does it. But I'm talking here with Jack Smith from Syncery. Very interesting company. So, Jack, I have some history with master data management. I remember 24 years ago working with a company that was trying to help organizations reconcile disparate information systems. And of
Yeah,
course, that's what MDM does. It allows you to line up first name, last name, all this stuff across different systems so you can run numbers and kind of get a big picture.
right.
But there was a lot of baggage back in the day. It was very difficult to get teams to adhere to rules to make the stuff work. And so it was just really, really hard and it didn't work very well. So now you got a whole bunch of different MDM solutions on the market, and you guys come along and you have this very interesting business focused orientation. So tell us what it is that you do as a baseline, and then we'll build from there.
Yeah, so let me just tee up a little bit about my opinion on the space and then also where we came from.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So, like you mentioned, 24, 25 years ago, MDM was kind of the hot item in data and systems around .com, right? That window. And the whole promise about bringing that data together, whether it's in spreadsheets, systems, whatever, warehouses, was fine. But if it solved the problem, we wouldn't have had the entire SaaS market of the early 2000s or the mid 2000s, right?
Right.
And then, so that was kind of phase one, your original MDM tools. And then we kind of got into phase two, maybe 2015, 2016 era, tools like Reltio that came in. And their goal was to really start bringing that data directly. They partnered with tools like Workato, different iPaaS companies to help you bring in that data and then do some of the analytics, right? And that got better, different domains, things of that nature. But what we're trying to do is really decomplicate the stack, make it easier. Like I was mentioning before, right? Our whole goal with MDM was to make it a less challenging process to manage, right? It's normally 2, 3, 4-year deployments. You work with consultants for millions and millions of dollars. It's hard to say what the actual purpose of MDM is besides master data. And our approach was, hey, if we can put the golden data that IT and governance and data teams work on back in the hands of business users, no one's having conflicting dashboards anymore. No one's wondering why Salesforce and the ERP are different, right?
Right.
That you have that same centralized truth. But rather than just being centralized, we believe in distributed, right? Let every system become a system of record, right? Rather than have an ETL, reverse ETL, BI tool, warehouse, DBT, we do all of that as a first-party codeless platform to make it easier for everybody to manage that whole enterprise.
I love that. Every system is a system of record. That's very interesting. So you're kind of sitting on top of all these environments, enabling a federated workflow.
Yeah.
Around master data.
Exactly. And the secret was actually started about, 7, 8, 9 years ago by the team that built Marketo that went and sold it to Adobe.
Yeah, right.
The product leader there is our CEO, Nick Bonfiglio.
All right.
He was the architect behind the native Salesforce Marketo sync. And of course, if you've used that before, it's pretty good, but it struggles when you start working with multiple systems, multiple instances of Salesforce, Marketo, et cetera. So after everybody successfully exited Marketo, they went and did their own things for a while, came back and built what essentially was a gap from that solution to the wider network. Whether it's marketing platforms, CRMs, ERPs, warehouses, spreadsheets, online Excel files, everything between, all those systems should have the master data that IT is building. Because if they don't, you're paying for storage on data that's worthless.
Right. That's a good quote. If they don't, you're paying for storage on data that's worthless. So help me understand how you actually deploy. Someone buys Syncery, do you deploy it in the cloud on-prem, and then do you basically scan the information environment to find all the different touch points, all the different information systems, column headers, and a lot of these tools will do auto matching to a certain point. You have to approve it or not approve it or whatever.
Right.
Is that kind of how it works?
Yeah, for the most part, right? We are in an opt-in, a rule of least privilege ecosystem, so we don't just take things.
Okay.
It is a full SaaS deployment. Let me start there. So you buy Syncery, you open the web app, you start there, and you would connect your different systems, right? Your warehouses, CRMs, et cetera. From there, we do an automatic sort of schema read. What are the objects available to the user auth-in, right? If it's a spreadsheet, we'll turn the spreadsheets into objects, the columns in the spreadsheets as fields, right? In that same kind of structure. And from there, you can either use, AI or auto mapping or do it manually to build out that sort of relationship diagram, how the different systems, interact. So we expose the ability to choose or to auto reconcile them, but then you actually decide how that gets brought together, right? Kind of the final say.
Interesting. And so, I mean, the business value here is that you're allowing both the business and the data teams to see the master data and thus be able to understand the master data and start piecing together their own view of the world. Like, let's say if you're in sales, you want to understand opportunities, who's doing well in which markets, which regions, et cetera. If you're in marketing, you want to understand what's working. If you're accounting, you want to understand all the financials of all these different environments. So that's the business value. But I guess I'm still trying to wrap my head around how it ultimately gets delivered. So Syncery itself, you said there's a web app where I log into, and are you just in each of these systems of record, do you have sort of a layer on top of that, which is managing the master data, or how does that work?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things there. Part of it is that, we are our own platform with our own data store that's hosted. We connect in and we sort of, similarly to like what you might do in an iPaaS or an ETL, we do pull that into our platform.
Right.
What's different in the way that we do it is that we actually have a patent on what we call multi-directional sync.
All right.
The ability to
All
pull in multiple systems of data on a per object basis into a central model. So a customer might be made up of an account in Salesforce, a company in Marketo,
All right.
a customer in Oracle ERP.
Right.
And you choose how they align, how they come together. You configure the rules, all codeless in nature, so that your customer is made up of the subsets of data points that matter in these different systems.
How interesting.
So we have a patent on that multi-directional sync. Configuration's all yours. But we're not a managed package. We don't plug into a view inside of Salesforce. We operate off their native API structure. So even more, we kind of, for better or for worse, sometimes slip off into obscurity if we don't work widely with the org, because what the user experience, the person in Salesforce, in ERP or whatever, just sees better data, more complete data in all those fields. It's not a managed package as powered by Syncery or something.
Right.
It just goes right back into the daily workflow people already have.
I see. No, that's very interesting. So what you're doing is you're enabling the reconciliation of these different systems such that, to your point, in any of the given systems of record, people have better data, cleaner data, richer data across the spectrum. Because like I'm old enough to remember EAI, Enterprise Application Integration. Okay, that's like 20 years ago. You're doing point-to-point integrations between systems to solve that problem.
Right.
But what you're doing is solving the problem for all those systems at the same time from one environment.
And so that kind of goes back into that, three-staged MDM cycle that I was talking about before. EAI was kind of the phase one, the OG, consolidation movement of data. Phase two was that iPaaS model, right? Your tools like, there's a bunch in that space. And then phase three is what we're doing, which we don't really believe anybody else is doing just yet. Which is that multiple systems on a per entity or object model to consolidate together and share out. We used to have this whole slogan around the single source of truth is dead.
Yeah, right.
Because, if Salesforce is the single source of truth,
right,
everything else is wrong. That's what you're implying.
Right. That's funny. Everything else is wrong. Single source of truth. That's interesting. So, I mean, are you essentially an iPaaS? I mean, could someone say you're basically an iPaaS?
We've competed in that space before. I don't like to, because I think there's plenty of tools that do iPaaS, at less of a cost, less complexity, less overhead,
I
right?
see.
But when the complexity gets challenging, when you start looking at 3 or 4 or 5 systems
Mhm.
to move data and hopefully master between, we become an easier solution.
Well, so here's my question. Like, are you actually then syncing the record level data, or you're just managing the relationships between systems?
Both. It's actually
Okay.
both. We handle the relationships very well. You can assign those in Synchrony, but we
Mhm.
do handle the record level data, right?
Okay.
If I'm Jack Smith, my name sucks for this kind of thing, right? There's going to be 5 or 6 of me, most likely in an enterprise across an org.
Interesting.
We can consolidate, merge, dedupe, decide what happens, instill the governance, and then control how the one version is controlled in those different applications. Someone makes a change in the ERP, that cascades out to the CRM if you've governed it to do so.
Right. Well, you know, it's really interesting that that you're talking about this, because I always think back to how we got here and what these different technologies do, and the whole concept of data warehousing,
Correct.
which is where this came from, resulted from the recognition that we had to pull information out of these source systems, get it into one relational model so we could make sense of it and understand.
And that was great for BI and doing the reporting. But I think where that fell short is you had to rely on a BI or data team. And those are the only people who had the accurate or correct data.
Mhm.
Somebody who sourced that, the sales rep who entered it originally in CRM, the team that's doing FP&A and otherwise, that
Right.
part of BI.
Right.
Now what we're trying to do is make sure that the BI team has the complete set, but the people who are still using Salesforce dashboards in a subset for their team, the FP&A team can work properly. And
Right.
if you look at the data in these different systems, they're all going to be the same.
Right. That's very interesting. So, I mean, where I'm kind of driving with this is like, do you really need a warehouse? And the short answer is the warehouse is not going to go away.
Correct.
I mean, you have so many players. Teradata is still out there.
Yes.
You got Amazon Redshift. You've got, Microsoft. All these players have their data warehouse. The question really becomes, how do you derive business value from these systems?
Right.
And what you folks are doing is really bringing that value down to the operational teams who are
Right.
working in marketing or sales or accounting or whatever.
Right.
So you're complementary to the data warehouse. You're complementary to the whole information strategy is the point.
We have people, customers in our base who have asked that same question, right? Do I really need a warehouse?
Right.
And, for some people, no.
Right.
I never tell somebody that we can replace their Snowflake instance, right? I don't want to.
Right.
We've had people turn off Salesforce and run spreadsheets, operate on our model, and build a headless CRM.
Wow.
You can do it. I don't recommend it, but
Right.
it certainly is, for some people enough.
That's interesting.
I'm a firm believer that, like you said, we are complementary.
Right.
We're not going to replace Snowflake or Redshift or Blob for cold storage or even, ML engineering,
That's
right?
funny.
It's great for that kind of stuff.
Right.
But, I was starting to get into this earlier, when we talk about relationship mapping, if you have all of your transactions, all of your orders from Shopify or whatever, roll up into your warehouse to hold on to history-wise,
Mhm.
and then you have your customers in CRM, and you're invoicing in, I don't know, say a Stripe or a Zora
Right.
or something, right?
Right.
Where we kind of offer that stronger domain is customer comes in, they, close won an opportunity in Salesforce, they bought something, right? We can then go look up the data, the different transactions they purchased, right? Associate those together with the customer coming in from CRM and actually automatically invoice with the right pieces from that model,
Mhm.
build a PLG motion on top of that because we have the transactions associated with what they bought, when they bought, with the person,
How interesting.
and then author that out to marketing,
Right.
automating the entire journey
Right.
without needing to, do one step at a time.
Right. No, this is interesting because you mentioned Workato and there's Zapier and there's Boomi and there are all of these iPaaS vendors out there. But what you're doing really is a higher level, a more strategic view that gets into the weeds as desired.
Correct.
Right. So you can go as deep into these systems as you want, because let's face it, I mean, SaaS sprawl, like SaaS sprawl,
Yes.
is a nightmare.
Yes.
It's a real problem. And there are all these opportunities to that whole mechanism. I mean, it's really, you can sit there and think about how much potential there is and how much technical debt there is and process debt with this SaaS sprawl. It's a pain in the ass.
I don't want to be in the business of competing with speed to lead for a tool like Workato.
Mhm.
They're faster than we are.
Right.
Full stop, no question.
Right.
Right. They're, when you're trying to pull in from meta information out of GitHub and get that, to a silver layer,
Right.
Workato, Zapier, they're better at that for
Right.
speed, simplicity, right?
Right.
But if you have 3 or 4 SaaS applications and you're trying to web that all together via iPaaS tools, and you want data to go bidirectionally between those, at just 4 systems, you're looking at over 16 recipes, integrations to maintain.
Right.
If it's roughly the same model in Synchrony, it's 1.
Wow.
And if we can work side by side, let these tools do what they're very efficient at.
Right.
That master model that then feeds off those speed informations
Right.
can be run much more effectively. And then, of course, reduce transactions across the board,
Right.
reduce costs, reduce overhead, reduce complexity.
Well, and so like we got a couple minutes left here in this segment, and you talk about Synchrony AI ready data.
Oh, yeah.
One of the mantras on our show, which we've been doing for 17 years now, is that if you want to do AI well, you must get your data house in order.
Right.
And you strike me as an excellent tool for being able to accomplish that, to know, first of all, what's out there, to align the fields across information systems so you can get some cogent view of the world, and then know when you have duplications, know when you have dirty data, all these kinds of things. That's what you need to have before you start pointing these AI algorithms at your environment.
If go check us out on LinkedIn, you can go 2, 3, 4 years back, and you'll see that we're talking about AI's coming. Get your data house in order. Right? I mean,
you got the same tool. It's
there's
the
a
same expression.
Right. There's a whole pitch that I can make about why our MCP server is so great for this kind of stuff. But I think what's really important is it goes back to the foundational pieces, right? If the only place your data is good is in the warehouse or somewhere else, right? You can only run AI efficiently off of that, right? We are all fighting somebody just copying it out of the CRM or off of a proprietary spreadsheet and putting it in their own license of ChatGPT.
Right.
We are fighting that, and we will continue to fight that. But if every system has the same data or the same quality data, right, then the edge AI tools, Salesforce Einstein, the difference in different applications, your silo GPTs all have the right context.
Right.
And that's even before we talk about what we do from an MCP model.
Right. Every system is a system of record. I mean, so I get back to reverse ETL. I've seen this whole trend come out. Okay, we got to get that trusted data back into these point systems, these source systems, basically. That's your vision. You've just taken it to a much higher level.
We've already done that plus some, right? Because reverse ETL historically has always been dashboard, look at the results, send the good results back. But, yes, we have a BI layer. That's part of it, right? But you can automate off those dashboards. Those dashboards become their own source of transform and things of that nature.
Oh, interesting.
But, even more than that, we can even control what happens with the bad data, not just put the good data back, but quality control the bad data, notify people, send it back in a state, but set it up to be, not verified or something of that nature.
Right.
The whole stewardship agenda.
Right. Right. A stewardship agenda. I love this stuff. Well, look these gentlemen up online. Jack Smith from Syncari. It's SYNCARI. Get your data AI ready. Who isn't trying to get their data AI ready? Well, folks, don't touch that. We'll be right back. You're listening to DM Radio, broadcasting from TDWI Orlando. We'll be right back.
Thanks.
All right, folks, back here on DM Radio with Sean Knapp of Ascend again. We're going to get into a slightly meatier topic here, which is what do you need to have to say that you have an AI agentic platform, an agentic AI platform, I guess. I mean, obviously, you need to be able to build these things. You need to be able to deploy them. You need to be able to monitor them. I mean, those are the 3 big ones, but what do you think?
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I think that's where it starts is you need to make it easy for people to build. I think the nuances there are, it's got to be really easy to iterate on it too. If you're requiring people to have to write a ton of code or do a bunch of complex things, you're going to really shrink down the amount of people who can contribute to that agent creation. You're going to pull it probably further away from the business and the domain experts.
Interesting.
If you will. I think very similarly, not just the ability to deploy it, but the ability to evaluate the efficacy of those agents, to move them through, how we look at it as various sandboxes. In our world, you're creating agents that run and have access to your data systems. And so you don't want to just create an agent and give it access to a bunch of production systems.
Right.
And, click the button on YOLO mode and away we go. And so you want that ability to, that actually was a mode in Cursor in the early days. It was really cool. So I think that's a really important one, is that ability to, to really make sure that you are sandboxed as you're developing, and as you go through your deployment process. And then the third piece is absolutely observability.
Hmm.
But it's, things like observing not just did it raw, how many tokens did it use, what were the actions did it take? And, something we were talking about earlier, can you actually politely interrogate the agent afterwards? Can you take all of that context and even interrogate why did it do the thing it
Mm-hmm.
did? And
Mm-hmm.
what we were talking about was this ability to take that entire thread of context,
Mm-hmm.
same system instructions, and go ask the LLM, why did you do X, Y, and Z? Which may sound kind of crazy because you're doing another LLM invocation off of a bunch of historical context and asking it to self-reflect.
Mm-hmm.
But that becomes actually wildly effective in the ability to do really interesting things and better understand the behaviors of an LLM and why and of your agent and why it took certain actions.
Right. One of the big challenges is that the LLMs themselves keep changing. I mean, take
Yep.
ChatGPT when they rolled out, like, I think it was five, all of a sudden you couldn't choose the older ones anymore.
Yep.
You just had to go with five. And there are a lot of people who are a little bit upset about that.
Yeah.
Like, well, what are you doing here?
Yep.
Do you see somewhere in the foreseeable future a sort of on-prem LLM that is static and therefore can be understood better and better over time? Or is the desire to get the latest cool stuff from new updated models too great to lock yourself into a model?
I think it's the latter.
Yeah.
The every LLM does behave differently. And for
Mm-hmm.
example, we've tuned a lot of our LLMs or a lot of our prompts over time to different LLMs. But uh, Claude or Sonnet 4 or 5 uh, calls tools slightly differently and
Right.
interprets the instructions we give around our tools slightly differently than GPT-5 and GPT-4.1 did.
Right.
OpenAI released GPT-5.1 yesterday and across all the API access. And so that's going to change with small nuances,
Right.
but all those behaviors. And the if this space were moving at the pace of, I don't know, freaking any other space that
Right.
over the last 2 decades, I'd say maybe people will try and freeze and pin the behaviors a little bit more.
Right.
Um, but I think we're seeing such powerful step functions in intelligence and behavior and price performance
Right.
that it's just so compelling to adapt your stuff to the latest and greatest.
And so is MCP the way that you give yourself a buffer to all that? In other words, can you control a fair amount in your MCP such that the changing LLMs don't cause as much of an impact?
I think you can to the degree that you can adapt the instruction sets going back to the LLMs. But
Hmm.
ultimately, I think a lot of it really comes down to how, as you provide instructions and tool descriptions out to the LLM, how does it input those?
Hmm.
Does it treat markdown tags really well and understand it, which a lot of the modern ones
Right, that's what
do,
I've heard.
whereas
Yeah, right.
do you have to use sort of like pseudo XML tags like a lot of the older LLMs to
Interesting.
handle better? And so I think that even then, the literal tokens that we're sending, and words that we're sending in to the LLMs, I think just you get better overall performance when you can tune them on a model by model basis.
Well, and I think the real key is that you want to have human beings in the loop, monitoring, using these things, firing them off, just like an intern. Like, go
Yep.
get me X, Y, and Z, and then I'm going to work on this, and then it comes back. I'm like, oh no, I wanted the other X, Y, Z. Okay. And so you just
Yep.
get into this workflow where you're going back and forth, telling the agent to go do this or go do that, or monitoring it basically. And there's only so much optimization that you can do because they keep changing.
Yep.
So the humans just need to modify their workflow to accept the help, which does come with a certain cost. I mean, at a certain point, the help just hurts, right? Like
Yeah.
when my buddy I was mentioning, Lou Simon from Optima, he's like, our teams are small, like two, three people, because if you get too many people, it's not optimal.
Yeah.
You're going to be slowing down because, well, is he you working on it? Am I working on it? Who? So it's like there's only so much that you can delegate in these environments, and that's kind of the future, right? Is smaller teams
Hmm.
focused on very specific things they have to accomplish that feed into the bigger enterprise.
Yep. Yeah, I totally agreed. And I think that's where we absolutely see, giving these teams the power and the tools
Hmm.
where, really strong evaluation frameworks. And
Hmm.
then I would also contend,
The
it,
evals, right?
yeah, so you can say like, hey, if I tweak this thing here, what's going to happen? Let me go and, load up thousands of other conversations or other tests that I have and see based on this prompt change, what's going to be the behavior, and do I
Wow.
get similar outcomes? We have unit and regression testing in software, similar kind of behavior. And then I think and probably, I would say I can't underscore enough the power of human intuition when you're working with these things. And, this is one of the things that, at the here at the TDWI conference where we're talking about this, I was chatting with folks yesterday. I'm a big believer that every employee in every company should be allowed to expense their ChatGPT subscription.
Sure.
Purely because, especially those who have really strong requirements around you can't have any ChatGPT in
Yeah,
a corporate
right.
environment.
Sure.
Just go a ton in your personal world.
Right.
Because if nothing else, there's so much power in building intuition as to what's a good prompt, how do you steer these things, and you want to train people on how to intuitively understand the behaviors and the impact of prompts
Right.
with AI agents. And so I do think it's really powerful when you have a small team with who have really great intuition as to the behavior. And if I change these things,
That's interesting.
what's going to happen?
Right. I think you're right. And I think we're seeing this Boomi, led by Steve Lucas. He gave a mandate. He said, you must use AI for some reason, somehow, some way. Just use it, familiarize yourself with it, because it's a completely different kind of technology than anything. It's not like a database.
Yeah.
It's a different thing.
Yeah.
And you have to play with it to see where the rough edges are, to understand what it does well, what it doesn't do well. But prompt engineering, like that was going to be this huge thing, and then it just kind of disappeared.
Yeah.
Because it's just you can't control it that well. I mean, that's what I think is fascinating, is that we worked all these years in a very deterministic way to build systems that did what we wanted them to do. And now we have this whole new era of these systems where we're like, whoa, we're like trying to slow it down basically and govern it and shape it because it's just so powerful.
Yeah.
It's like, well, why would you do that? Because it's so powerful.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that's where we got to spend more time. It's not prompt engineering, it's context engineering now, which is how do I actually get the right context fed in
Right.
with, high signal, low noise, to help the agent do the right thing and follow the right behaviors.
Right.
And to do that, you got to have this intuition, this education around how agents work and how LLMs work. Yet it's so new that nobody actually has a degree in this yet.
Right.
We're barely getting courses out in industry training people on this yet.
Wow. Well, and a lot of it is still inwardly focused. I think we're starting to see some stuff that's outwardly focused, but we're also hearing some horror stories of chat bots that are like out of the box right away doing bad things, like, oh, slow down. So you do have to think about it. You do have to get your data house in order, right?
Yeah.
Final thoughts.
Oh, I agree. I mean, I think this is a big theme here too, which is it is really important to get your data house in order. Things like governance may actually even be getting cool again, because really strong data on the data governance side means you have really great understanding of your data and the value of it, and it's high quality, and you know what really likes like well documented, understood, high quality data. Agents.
That's right. That's right. Well, data governance is important. It's more important now than ever. I tell people, we talked with the gentleman from Syncari earlier today, get your data house in order. He laughed and goes, yeah, we were saying that like 3 years ago. I'm like, all right, you're on board, man. You see what's happening here.
It can take people a while to.
I mean, because these environments are so unwieldy right now. They're insane. Many large organizations have no idea how many information systems they have.
Yep.
So it's like you got to clamp down on that, at least scan and start organizing and analyzing and understanding what you. Well, once again, look up Ascend.io, Sean Knapp. You're listening to DM Radio. All right, folks, back here on DM Radio, going to another segment with Jack Smith of Syncari, because I'm just loving all his knowledge about MDM and agentic MDM. They've got the trademark on that, so that's pretty clever. As you all know, I was in the MDM space 20 odd years ago. I remember all the painful stories, the war stories about multi-million-dollar MDM projects that never quite got there and never generated the value. Well, these guys are on that. And he also knows about the latest hot topic, MCP, Model Context Protocol, which is the layer in between your information systems and the LLM, which is pretty important. The best architecture I've come across is where you build a knowledge graph on top of your information systems, then have the MCP, then have the LLM. But Jack Smith, tell us about what MCP is in layman's terms, and how Syncari leverages MCP to optimize MDM.
Well, first off, Eric, thanks for having me back. I appreciate it. And I think your read is right? The better view of like not just throwing your data at an LLM, right? Because LLMs are generative AI, right? They are not the same every time. You change a little bit,
right,
or even go the exact same,
right.
It's not going to be exact, right? Which is where that knowledge graph to build the context
Right.
for what you're running off of is so important. And I think that piece often gets lost. This kind of goes back into our whole philosophy. Before I get into that, what really is MCP, right?
Right.
We're all fighting the, hey, just copy and paste it into chat GPT
Right.
and see what happens, right?
Right.
I've done 3 or 4 different talks this year with like different data lead CEOs, CDAOs, et cetera. And they're just trying to figure out any way to stop that habit, right?
How interesting.
It's the theme of the year is something so simple, right? But whether or not AI is a bubble, a chunk of this will be around forever, right? There's a part that is just here now, and under no circumstance is the ability to just plug into an LLM going to go away.
Right.
We need to govern that better.
Right.
That's where MCP came from.
Right.
If we can make an LLM get a little bit less generative, actually, pull it back to reading and analyzing the data a bit more and not hallucinating on ideas, then we can get more accurate results and we're more effective as an org, right? So think of the MCP server as your method of taking your data and helping make a out-of-the-box model a little bit more trained, a little bit more proper on the data that you're working with. Now, there's a lot of tools. Everybody under the sun talks about their shiny new MCP server, right? There's no one who doesn't have one these days.
I can't believe how many MCP servers there are.
Right.
I mean, out of nowhere, everyone's got an MCP. All right, like, hold on, guys.
Right. And if you ask about what makes theirs special, they'll tell you it uses their special integration ability or the way that you can take the data out of, system X or Y or whatever. But to my knowledge, almost all of these only do analysis. They can tell you what the data says. But I use this analogy internally. If I have a problem and I go to AI and AI tells me I have 4 problems, I'm frustrated.
Right.
I thought I was going to do something small. I've got to deal with all this other stuff now. I don't really know how to solve it. From a strategic perspective, we have a belief at Synchrony that, hey, if AI tells you have more problems because it's identified more pieces. If it can't solve those problems for you, it's adding a lot more work to your plate. Everybody else is inundated by, how challenging the adoption of AI is, right? Because they have more problems than they realized they had. My fiance is an architect, and so they have to do a lot of work with AI, especially for their drafting and working purposes. And whenever she thinks she has problem A, she's got problem B, C, D as well. And it would have actually just been easier for her to do it all by hand. Right. So I tell this story to set up the context for if you have these 3 or 4 problems, what we do at Synchrony is allow you to author the solution as well.
All right.
Right. Let's take a churn analysis on customers, right? You ask AI to do a churn analysis, and any MCP should be able to look into your data, at least a system or 2, and say, hey, we've identified what churn is. Here's what we're using to decide how to determine this. And, tools like Claude can build you a pretty dashboard to get the report together, right? But if half your roster is a churn risk, you're shaking the piece of paper out to whomever owns these accounts and freaking out and trying to figure out all these different pieces. You're diving back into the CRM, the ERP, whatever to solve this. You've created a new week's worth of work.
Right.
At Synchrony, what we can do is we can actually rectify that, right? Find the owner of these customers, create a ticket automatically in Jira, notify the rep or the owner or whatever, and actually set up a meeting with them automatically if you've integrated these systems.
Wow.
That's what we're trying to do differently is that whether or not you use us or use anything else, don't look at just analysis. Don't operate on a stateless MCP without hosting that data.
How interesting.
If you host the data, you can author change and then integrate that back out.
How interesting. So basically, you're using it as a stepping stone to automate key business workflows to get the right people involved instead of being what analysis used to be, which was offline human thinking. Right?
Eric, are you trained as a coder in any way?
A little bit,
Right?
yeah.
So, if you've done object-oriented programming in any capacity, at least my formal training always told me that, like, you never build objects without wrappers. You never call methods or functions without wrappers because they're stateless. You can't, host a process, embed a process, put different variables in that process. You have to rerun it every time and your variables are stuck.
Right.
MCP was built like everyone forgot the foundations of code, which is that you put a wrapper around your functions and methods so that you can author different variables, different processes, and author solutions.
How interesting.
We do that with your data. Synchrony becomes the wrapper for your MCP. So we author change on the Synchrony data set, and then we write back those pieces where it needs to go.
Huh.
You create a ticket in Synchrony, that's a new change that files out to your Jira system.
Right.
You look up the owner of an account, or who bought this, that, or the other, or which vendor did the worst or something, and we can notify, create new dashboards, new metrics, new processes without needing to rely on some other AI or somebody going into that system making that change manually.
How interesting is that? Well, what you want is an orchestration layer,
Right.
and that's what you're talking about. You are enabling the data-oriented functionality about which the whole business runs, quite frankly, and thus you are enabling the MCP to do what it does best,
Exactly.
without causing trouble.
Exactly. I mean, pulling myself out of my 3-minute pitch on why we do it the best, right?
Right.
You can do this yourself, right? You don't have to buy us. Of course you could, but think about bringing the data somewhere, running the MCP on that, and then governing and controlling the change automation.
Mm-hmm.
Use that orchestration layer, like you're saying, to control the process and author outputs.
Right. How interesting is that? So how many customers do you guys have? Like, how big is Synchrony now, roughly?
We actually just raised our Series B this year.
All right.
So we're growing. We're in the realm of somewhere between 100 and 150 customers.
That's pretty good, though.
Yeah, we kind of our average size, that small to mid enterprise, 500 million to a couple billion in size.
Right.
Usually we don't, it's hard to compete with somebody who's got 20 years in Informatica and a retainer with,
Right.
KPMG, right?
Right.
No matter how upset they are with it, that's a big order to change.
That's funny.
But, when you're growing, when you're, really breaking into being a tall enterprise, Fortune 1000,
Right.
you have an opportunity to do what everyone else has done
Right.
and spend $5-10 million on an MDM deployment, whether it's for your own data or for AI.
Right.
We're offering an opportunity to do something different,
Yeah.
right? Which is circumvent the whole thing. Let it be distributed across the org.
Right.
Break down the silos you claim so strongly that you want to break down.
That's right.
And, set yourself up for success.
Right.
Right? Everyone's going to make you move SaaS anyways.
Right. Right. I love it. Look this gentleman up online. Very, very clever. Jack Smith, Synchrony. We'll talk to you next time, folks. You've been listening to DM Radio.
Thanks, guys.